It's a bit weird how obsessed we all are with dystopia as a concept. Maybe it's something in the way our own societies work, or maybe it's because George Orwell went and broke the seal back in 1949, but for whatever reason, almost all of our forms of media have had a fetish for dystopian settings at one time or another. In the case of video games, dystopia has been explored from almost every possible angle. We've had cyberpunk dystopia, post-apocalyptic dystopia, and even straight totalitarian dystopia classic. Indie games are no exception either. Many smaller developers have often attempted to capture the themes and visuals of dystopia, and boy have they done it in some interesting ways. I'm Will with Cliqist, and today we're counting down the top 5 indie dystopian games. Hypnospace Outlaw. Well, we're starting today's list with a bit of an odd one. A fair few people out there probably won't consider Hypnospace Outlaw a dystopia game. It actually takes place back in the 90s, around the early days of Web 2.0. In this, well, I hesitate to use the term alternate history, but basically it's the 90s as we understand it, except the people use a bad VR version of the internet in their dreams while they're sleeping, called the Hypnospace. You play as an enforcer, basically a voluntary police force which help prevent crimes such as harassment, copyright infringement, and extra-legal commerce. I say crimes, but these are at most against corporate policy. A lot of the time you're cracking down on people for posting copyrighted images or for calling someone names, and it all ends up having quite an Orwellian vibe to it, especially when the people who own the Hypnospace start involving you in backroom deals and the like. The visuals are very much the sort of thing that was popular on computers of the era. Well, they weren't so much popular as they were the only thing available, but regardless, if you ever browsed GeoCities or Angelfire pages back in the day, then you're going to be super familiar with this aesthetic. The whole thing has a sort of retro-punk vibe, a term I am determined to shoehorn into common usage. It basically means a game which uses a level of technology at odds with the visual style or time period. Case in point, Hypnospace Outlaw. It's the mid-90s, but everyone is able to use Sleep VR, which I'm about 99% sure didn't exist at the time. I don't remember it anyway. Regardless of any attempts to invent a new term on my part, Hypnospace Outlaw is a fun experience, especially if you have any nostalgia for the late 90s computers and Web 2.0. It basically plays out like an adventure game, but all of the puzzles involve you surfing the internet for a long time. I think it just about hits the right spot between fun and frustrating in terms of both random logic and annoying UI design. Definitely worth a look if you're after a slightly different take on what dystopia can be. Shadowrun Returns. Shadowrun has had a hell of a history behind it. It's been around since the late 80s, and since then has become one of the most popular tabletop role-playing games of all time, second possibly only to the monolith which is Dungeons & Dragons. Back in the mid-90s, Shadowrun saw some video game success, with games on the SNES and Mega Drive, but there haven't been many releases since then. Well, except for that game, but we don't talk about that game anymore. Back in 2013, Shadowrun fans were in luck. Harebrained Schemes remembered those older games and decided to bring Shadowrun back to life with Shadowrun Returns. It's a turn-based strategy game using grids, similar to games like XCOM and Final Fantasy Tactics, but it also has RPG elements since you create and level up your own character. The world of Shadowrun is a blend of fantasy, cyberpunk and crime. Your character is a Shadowrunner, a criminal who survives on society's dark underbelly by going on runs. Jobs which usually require you to kill, steal or destroy something for someone much higher up in society. While the rest of the world are content to be wage slaves to powerful corporations, you live your life by the edge of a knife or the pull of a trigger. The take on dystopia is a lot more standard this time around. The world is controlled by powerful companies, everyone trudges through dark and miserable lives, and the world is in a crappy state partially because it's become so horrendously overpopulated. While it doesn't really do anything special with the whole dystopian aspect, it does build an interesting world. The people in the world have their own dialect, new words or mutated words we're familiar with, and their attitudes match those of the world that they inhabit. There's also a lot of content on offer here. The main mission has you avenge your dead friend with the help of a cameo from the SNES game, but there's also a Steam Workshop support, which means you're never going to run out of content. As soon as you finish a custom mission, there's a new fan-made level or story coming out. Not to mention they've done like all the DLC, and they've gone and made a sequel too. Will this game never stop giving? Deponia / Technobabble. Okay, so I'll be the first person to admit that this is sort of cheating. Deponia and Technobabble are two very different games, despite both being points and clicks centred around Dystopia. In Deponia, the entire world is covered in garbage, and everyone has to live in it, but the characters, events and puzzles are all light-hearted and silly. The visuals are also hand-drawn, traditionally animated, or at least they look traditionally animated. On the other hand, Technobabble uses pixel graphics, has a more classic-style cyberpunk dystopian feel, and has a tone which can't decide what it wants. There is a moment at the beginning of the game where a character smacks face first into a wall, complete with wacky comedy sound effect. Then, not 10 minutes later, she's allegedly horribly killed by way of an explosion, and is either assumed to be alive thanks to plot-proof armour, or is sprayed up the wall of her grotty apartment. Complaints aside, both of these games offer the same way of playing, albeit with different tones and story styles. Both control like classic adventure games, with inventory puzzles and sometimes ridiculous logical leaps. The key difference is that one plot is deep and involving, and features no less than 3 people being horribly murdered, while the other is silly, light-hearted, and features a main character so dense that they might as well be made of dark matter. Which of the two is better is very subjective, and pretty much comes down to which style you prefer more. Pixel graphics versus hand-drawn, cyberpunk crime thriller or whimsical cartoony adventure in garbage land. I mean, at the end of the day, both games offer different things, but both offer great experiences. If you've got the time, why bother picking between them at all? Just do one straight after the other. Although Deponia does have at least a more interesting take on the idea of dystopia, so play that one first. Papers, Please. Honestly, it was a huge struggle trying to figure out which of the top games should get the number 1 and number 2 spots. Papers, Please only just got nudged into the second spot. Papers, Please is an intense, emotional, and downright oppressive experience, and almost all of the gameplay is squeezed into basically one room with a very simple set of actions. In Papers, Please, you work as a border officer in a communist post-war country. As the game starts out, you admit only your own country's citizens, but as time goes by, more and more rules are added as your country loosens its borders. You're paid by the amount of people you process successfully, so you have to balance your need to get things right with your need to process border crossings as quickly as possible. The cash you earn is spent on rent, feeding your family, and upgrades to your booth to make processing easier. As you can probably imagine, this makes the game intense as hell, and if that wasn't bad enough, the game keeps throwing difficult situations at you. You'll get people coming to your booth who aren't legally allowed to enter, but they'll give you stories or excuses as to why they need to get in. A lot of the time you have to once again balance your need to feed your family with your desire to help people and be a good person. The noise that sounds when you get a citation will eventually start to fill your heart with dread at the thought of the lost earnings, and then the thought of deciding of which of your family members is going to go hungry that night. Needless to say, Papers, Please can be an overwhelming experience at times, and it is without a doubt one of the best dystopian games out there. Hell, it might just be one of the best indie games ever made. Okay, so before we move on to the number 1 spot on the list, there are a fair few honourable mentions that I wanted to go over. So, to keep things quick, I'm going to go over them rapid fire with a sentence or two to sum them up, so, you know, let's go. Beholder. Basically similar to Papers, Please, but you actually have to move around instead of spending all of your time in a single chair. Also, it doesn't quite manage to pull off the emotional weight that Papers, Please has. 60 seconds. A sort of interesting take on the whole nuclear apocalypse thing, but it can get old pretty quickly. On the plus side, it's really customizable, in that you can choose to do either just the run around collecting bit, or the story stuff depending on what you're into. Hard Reset. A pretty good, if slightly bland, cyberpunk FPS game. It's in a very classical style, similar to games like Painkiller or New Doom, so there's no reloading or iron sights. Like I said, it's fun but pretty shallow. Observer. A cyberpunk proto-walking simulator that was injected with survival horror DNA. A fun romp, but nothing too special. Rutger Hauer's good in it though. Dystopia. Once a fun and involving multiplayer Half-Life 2 mod, but now it's just a ghost town. If you can land this with some friends, then it's worth a look since it's free. We Happy Few. Quite a disappointing release after all the hype, but it's still pretty fun. It's got an interesting retropunk aesthetic. Yes, I'm still trying to make that a thing, and with the new modes that just got added in a free update, it could be pretty entertaining, as long as the bugs don't completely ruin the experience for you. Also, quick side note, this definitely counts as indie in my book, because a lot of the development was already underway by the time a big studio picked up the publishing rights and pre-order bonus and special editions that, you know, f***ed it. Rain World. Like I said before, I had a hard time choosing between this and Papers, Please for the number 1 spot, but the feeling I got when I played this game just sealed the deal. Rain World is unlike any other game I have ever played before in my life. You control a small furry creature called a slug cat, which sounds gross but is actually kind of cute. Your job is to survive the deadly post-human world and make your way back to your lost family. Rain World is a rare game. It manages to pull off an almost surreal feeling, and it allows the player to discover how the game and the world works, but without being really obtuse and annoying. The developers made it clear that their intention was to make the player feel like a rat on a subway line, clutching to survival but without grasping the high mechanics of the world around them, and that intention comes across in the game. You have to explore the world to find your family, scrounging food to fill your belly enough so that you can find a safe place to hibernate before the deadly rain comes and spells your demise. You can pick up objects in the environment to help you fend off the enemies and hazards, but other than that, most of the controls and mechanics are exploratory. The other creatures are just like you, albeit with bigger teeth and harder skin. Just creatures out to survive in a harsh world, out to feed themselves so they don't starve to death. There's not so much of a story in the game, beyond the story of your own survival. There's no dialogue, no on-screen text. Honestly, nothing beyond brief character moments and environmental clues actually gives you insight into what is going on. You can tell from the world design that the world once housed human beings, or at least something closely approximate to them. But beyond that, the world that came before is a complete mystery. Honestly, I don't even know how to explain how good this game is. Seriously, if you even kind of looked at these clips and thought, that looks interesting, then you owe it to yourself to give it a go, as soon as you can. Did you agree with our picks? What's your favourite dystopian nightmare world? Share us with your friends and subscribe for more. Also, feel free to check out my own channel too.